You have an option of creating an app from scratch itself. Things which you actually need to create an application is just the name of the application and a brief description if you have any, and you can start on the journey of creating an application. I'll start off with an application of sales process. So when you click on save, it actually lands you to the overview page. I'll go tab by tab and explain you what are the things present inside it. So in this page itself, it's a page which actually gives you the overview of the application, the icon selection, the slug of the application, the description part of it, and if you want, you can upload images onto it as well. Next, if I go to the object part, so this is I'd say the main important part of the App Studio. So you'll be able to see this is kind of an empty state currently, where you are able to see there is no objects present here. On the right hand side, you have an option of this is an object library and this is an attribute library. So object library has objects which are present inside the tenant itself. So mostly objects which are created in the different applications which are present in this tenant, you'll be able to see those objects here. You can search onto the object by object name, by the application name itself, and based on that you can add those attribute object inside your application. This, you have the attribute library present here, so you'll be able to see all the attributes which have been created inside this tenant, and you can use this attribute to be added inside an object. Also you have other things as well. So first I'll start with the object part itself. So supposedly I want to create an object from scratch itself. I click on create. So on clicking on create, there are 4 different type of object types defined here. So I'll define one by one what it means to you. So first I'll start with the business object. So business object is something where like for example, if you have a use case, like for example for me the current use case is a sales process. So a business object, like for me, if I want to create account, it would be a business object just because it doesn't have any workflow related to it. So any objects which it will store a master data which doesn't have any workflow related to it, it can be created as a business object. Now there is something called as case. So case is an object type where for example, if you are creating an object lead here, so lead should be a case just because it has a workflow into it and it will have multiple tasks inside it. So a case can have multiple tasks inside it, so that is why lead can be created as a case here. And in task we have 2 things. One is the task which interacts with the workflow, and the other one which doesn't interact with the workflow. So the task which doesn't interact with the workflow, we call it as an ad hoc task, and which interacts with the workflow, we call it as a workflow task. So what it does is mostly, so whenever you are creating a task which interacts with the workflow, it is actually getting created inside Flowable, and it gets created based on the workflow which you have created inside Flowable. Like for example, there is 3 tasks, task A, B and C in the Flowable you have configured. Task B should get created after task A, and task A should automatically get created when the case is getting created, and task C should get created after task B is completed. So in this order it will get created when this conditions get satisfied. But when you create a task which doesn't interact with the Flowable or interact with the workflow, then it is called as an ad hoc task, and in that ad hoc task can be created inside a case, and it is created manually. So it is kind of a task which is, like for example, it is a task which needs to be created, but it doesn't interact with the workflow, and it needs to be created manually. It is not present on the any trigger or any logic getting satisfied. So that is what the object types are. So supposedly I create one business object here as account, and as a business object is getting created, now as you can see, when one object is getting selected here, there are 4 different tabs present here. So, and on account level, like whenever a new object is getting created, there are few default attributes present here. So name, status, assignee, priority, due date are some default attributes for the tenant which has been created. Now if you want to edit also, you can see the configuration which is present here. And apart from that, you have the status maps. So every object which we create has a status. So this is kind of an ammo attribute which are present as default. So for that you can configure what are the status which needs to be present. So in the status, what you can do is you can add multiple statuses into it. You can add the display name of it. You can add the color which you want to see with that status. You have to select which is the ammo type or the ammo name configured with the status. So supposedly if it is kind of a complete, like what it does is it actually helps us configure with the Flowable. So this completed tasks are actually sent as an event to the Flowable that the task is getting completed, and also completed statuses task objects are not editable as well. So that is how you can configure and select the ammo name here for the statuses. And we have the priority map here, where there are 4 different priorities created by default. You can create more onto it. Also there's a pin icon, which is kind of signifying the default priority which would be set for the object being created. And the last thing which we have is the form. So here what it does is, it will show you all the attributes which have been created in the attribute part, and you can like hide or show the attributes which needs to be present inside the form. And also you can reorder the attributes which ordering you want to have inside it. And after the application is created and it is published, you can click on open editor to see the form which is actually getting generated. So that is what you can do from here. Now I'll get into the attribute library. So as I said earlier, so this is an attribute library. It contains the attributes which are present inside the tenant itself. Like currently I'm giving the demo from the QA tenant, so all the attributes present in QA tenant are being listed here. You can see the data type here as well. So now I want to create an attribute from scratch. If I click on create, there are various different data types which are present here. There are other subtypes as well. Like for example, if you click on text, there are other subtypes which are coming in as well. So you can select onto it and you can configure. Now I want to create a field name as account name, and on the attribute level we have different configurations present. So I'll go into it one by one. So on the account name, you have a configuration of required. So if you enabled it, what it does is mostly, so whenever you are generating a form, be it a tooljet form or a JSON form, what it will do is it will make that field as required. Also currently the feature is not present, but in table and header widget or wherever this attribute is being used inside the pages itself, it will be marked as a required field, that it can't be ignored for the next step to proceed. So it will be marked as a required if I mark it as a required here. Next thing is disabled. So what it does is, so if I have made this as disabled, when the tooljet form or the JSON form will get generated, this field will be by default disabled. User won't be able to edit it. Third is unique. So as the name suggests itself, so what it does is whenever this data will be getting created inside the DB, it will check for the uniqueness of it, if it is a unique field or not. So that what it does. Next is encrypt. So encrypt, what it does is, for example, when this account name like this field will be getting created inside the DB, it will be encrypted. It will be stored as an encrypted field inside Prisma, and whenever it is being rendered on the UI itself also, it will be like rendered as an encrypted field itself. Next is auditable. So what it does is, supposedly if there is any change onto this object, onto this attribute, it will actually add a log inside the audit log, and you will be able to see this data inside the activity. Like for example, if you go to the details page of any object and if you add activity widget, there you will be able to see updates of this account name. So by marking this as auditable. Next is validation. So as you can select on validation, there are 3 things coming here. So we have added few suggestions onto the validation. Like if you want to have, like for example, if you want to have a validation of alphabets into it, like for example, account name should have only alphabets, so you can select onto it. It will actually give you the regex, which pre-fill this regex, and it will give you the message as well. You can edit the message as per your convenience, or you can keep it as well. You can change into different validation suggestions as well. So if you add validations here, it will actually apply these validations inside the, I'd say currently it is working in tooljet form, but in future it should work onto your table, your header, or any widget where this attribute is added. Next is formula. So currently we are using formula for 2 things. One is auto generating few of the IDs. Like for example, there is a scenario where you want to have account names getting auto generated, and you have something as you want auto increment of 4. So what it will do is, so whenever a new account is getting created, this account name will have a value of AM301. so that will be value which will be getting created by default whenever you are creating it. It doesn't need to be typed in manually, and it will by default auto increment. First use case is this. Second use case which we have catered into this formula is a calculate. So there are calculations. So there are times where, for example, there is an attribute as total amount, and you have 2 attributes as unit price and the quantity. So based on the multiplication of unit price and quantity, you have to get the total amount. So for those purpose, you can directly use calculation from here as well. So this is the different properties which are present here. Now if I remove this and I directly create this attribute, so you can see this attribute actually comes at the top whenever it is getting created, and you can drag drop this attribute into the object. And there are other things present in this library as well. For example, there are multiple attributes now created and you want to add multiple attributes to the object itself, what you can do is directly multi-select from here. You can select the object which you want to move into. Currently one object is created only, so you can select that and add. It will actually add it to that object, both these attributes. So this is the attribute library which we have. Now I'll get into more of the attribute properties. So whenever you edit an attribute, there are a few things which are coming at the bottom, which is the referencing concept. So what we actually have is, so in the tenant, like for supposedly you have created this account name. Now this account name will be visible to all the applications present inside this tenant, and any user which actually uses this account name, like any user can use this account name. Now if you are editing some properties here, like for example you are making it as required, do you want to do these changes everywhere where this attribute is being used? If yes, then you have to keep this as checked and save. So it will override all the, I'd say, everywhere this attribute has been used, and it will actually help like carry this property to all the I'd say copies of this attribute or the links of this attribute. Now if you don't want, like for example you have made this as required, but you don't want to make this as required in the other places where this attribute has been used, so you have to uncheck this attribute, uncheck this override reference and save it. So there, like for example now in the second application where I have used this attribute, this account name won't be required there, won't be kept as a required field, but here it will be kept as a required field. Now there is another thing which is called a save as new. Now if you have done some changes, like for example you have done disabled as well, and now if you think okay, this attribute referencing actually works on the slug itself, so all these attributes will have the same slugs everywhere present. You can also change the name and keep it as different, but you don't want to keep the link of this attribute to all the other attributes which have been created in different application or the same application. So if you click on save as new, it will actually create a different attribute. It will change the slug, it will change it to a different slug itself. So as you can see, it will change its slug to a different thing as well. So it is now removed from the link which is present for the attribute referencing. So these are the concepts inside attribute referencing.